The boardroom air was suffocating, the kind of silence that weighed heavier than words. Papers rustled, pens clicked nervously, and every pair of eyes turned to the waitress who didn't belong there. Harper Evans stood at the head of the table, still clutching the serving tray she had carried upstairs only 20 minutes ago. She wasn't supposed to be here, not in a room with 12 of the city's most powerful people. Yet here she was, spotlighted by fluorescent light that made every flaw on her thrift store blazer visible. Across from her sat Jonathan Kane, billionaire real estate mogul, the man whose signature built half the skyline of Manhattan. His stare was cool, practiced. The stare of someone who had learned long ago that silence could be sharper than accusation. "You have 30 seconds, he said, his voice deliberate, cutting through the tension like a blade. "Explain why you're standing in my boardroom and why that ring on your hand looks exactly like one that's been in my family for over a century." A murmur rippled through the board members. Some leaned forward, curious. Others leaned back, amused. Harper felt her pulse pounding in her ears. The ring, the one her mother had pressed into her hand that very morning, suddenly felt heavier than the tray she still held. I'm just here to deliver coffee," she whispered. Her words landed flat against the polished oak table. The CFO, Avery Holt, smirked. "Then deliver it and leave. This is no place for waitresses and sentimental jewelry." His cologne drifted across the table, too strong, masking something sour beneath. The German Shepherd at the far end of the room, part of the building's new security protocols after a leak, gave a sudden sharp bark. The handler hushed it quickly, but not before several heads turned. The dog's gaze had locked on Holt, nostrils flaring. Harper noticed. So did Jonathan. Her throat tightened. "Don't shake. Don't let them see you crack." She pressed the tray down on the table with trembling hands. One of the coffee cups tipped, a thin line of liquid sliding dangerously close to a folder marked "Confidential." She caught it just in time. Gasps rose, but she held the cup steady, her knuckles white. "I didn't come here to cause trouble," she said, finding her voice. "But if you're asking about this ring, my mother gave it to me. She said it was a promise." The words slipped out before she could stop them. A promise. They sounded too fragile in this fortress of contracts and power suits. Jonathan leaned back, studying her with eyes the color of storm glass. "That ring," he said, slowly, "was custom-made for my great-grandfather. It has never left this family." His gaze hardened. "So either your mother is a liar or she's a thief." End of quote. The words landed like a blow. Harper's chest burned. Her mother, the most honest woman she knew, who returned a dollar bill if the cashier gave her too much change, called a thief? She wanted to scream, but all she could do was hold Jonathan's gaze. "I'm not mistaken," Harper said, her voice steady now. "I've held this ring in my hand since I was a child. I know every line of it. I could draw it from memory." The board members shifted, whispering to each other. Holt smirked again, his expression saying everything. "This girl doesn't matter. She's a nuisance, a distraction." Jonathan's hand closed around a pen. He tapped it once against the table. The sound echoed louder than it should have. "You claim this ring belongs to you," he said. "Then prove it." The challenge hung heavy in the air. Harper's heart raced. She glanced down at the ring, its faint scratches catching the light. She thought of her mother's frail fingers, the way she had whispered, "Keep it safe. One day it might be the only proof we have." Her gaze returned to Jonathan's. For the first time, she saw something shift in his expression, not anger, not arrogance, but unease. A crack in the armor. The chairwoman cleared her throat. "This is absurd. Mr. Kane, we are here to finalize Whitestone's acquisition. Let's not derail the meeting for family melodrama." But Jonathan didn't look away from Harper. The silence stretched. Even the rain against the window seemed to hush, waiting. Finally, he spoke, his tone measured but edged with something raw. "You have until the end of this meeting," he said, "to decide whether you're going to walk out of here quietly, or whether you're ready to defend that story in front of this board." The German Shepherd barked again, louder this time. Everyone jumped. Everyone except Harper. She tightened her grip on the ring, the tray forgotten on the table. "Walk away," she told herself. "Walk away before you're swallowed whole." But another voice rose inside her. Firmer, older, carrying the weight of her mother's will. "Prove it." She lifted her chin. "I'll defend it," she said. Gasps broke out across the room. Holt cursed under his breath. Jonathan's pen stilled. His eyes, unreadable, locked on hers. The room was no longer a boardroom. It was a battlefield. CTA for podcast audience, insert at the end of Chapter 1. If you've ever stood your ground when someone powerful tried to dismiss you, hit like so Harper's voice is heard. And comment below, should she fight for the truth, or walk away while she still can? The rain had not stopped when Harper left the tower that night. It followed her home like an uninvited companion, drumming on the subway roof, smearing neon across the train windows. By the time she reached Brooklyn, her shoes squelched with every step. She didn't care. The words of Jonathan Cain still clung to her ears like burrs: liar, thief. The phrases looped until they felt carved into her ribs. At the corner diner where she worked nights, the familiar hum of the refrigerator and the crackle of the fryer greeted her like old friends. It was nearly midnight, the lull between late-shift cops and insomniacs. She clocked in automatically, apron tied around her waist, and moved through the motions as though her body knew the dance better than her mind. Rough day? Chloe asked from behind the counter, raising a brow. Harper forced a smile. You could say that. She didn't elaborate. How could she? How could she tell Chloe that a billionaire had looked her in the eye and told her that the only precious thing her mother had ever clung to was stolen property? She carried a pot of coffee to a booth where two old men played chess. The smell of damp coats rising from them. Their easy banter, their quiet laughter, it all seemed impossibly distant. When her shift ended, Harper walked home to the small apartment she shared with her mother, Laura. The hallway smelled of old carpet and radiator heat. She pushed open the door quietly, not wanting to wake her. But the light in the bedroom was still on, and the sound of a faint cough told her that sleep had not come. Harper slipped inside. Laura sat propped against pillows, her hair thinner than Harper remembered from childhood, but her eyes still carrying that sharp, unwavering love. On the nightstand beside her rested the small velvet box. Harper felt her breath catch. She hadn't noticed Laura had left it out tonight. The box was worn from years of being opened and closed. The velvet rubbed bare at the corners. Harper sat gently on the bed. You should be resting, she murmured. Laura smiled faintly. And you should be sleeping instead of working yourself to the bone. But here we are. Her gaze dropped to Harper's hand, where the ring gleamed under the weak lamp. You wore it. Harper hesitated. The words she had carried all evening pressed against her tongue like stones. Mom. At work tonight, someone recognized it. Laura's expression changed, subtle but undeniable. Her hand, lined and thin, reached for the box as though to protect it. Recognized how? Harper whispered the name. Jonathan Cain. He said it belonged to his family. That it's been in their line for 100 years. Silence filled the room, heavy and suffocating. The hum of the radiator was the only sound. Laura closed her eyes, as though bracing against a storm. Of course he would say that, she said at last. Of course he would. Harper leaned forward. What does that mean? Mom, you've told me all my life that this ring was Granddad's, that he gave it to you as a promise. Laura opened the box and cradled the ring's twin within it. The one Harper wasn't wearing. The band scratched, the sapphire's fire dulled but still present. She held it like something fragile enough to dissolve in air. It was your grandfather's, yes. But not the way you think. Harper's chest tightened. Then tell me. Please. Because tonight, I stood in front of a room full of people who looked at me like dirt. And I couldn't defend you, because I don't even know what I'm defending. Laura looked at her daughter, her voice soft but steady. Your grandfather Owen was an engineer. Brilliant, stubborn, too honest for his own good. He worked for the Cains when he was young. He designed foundations, safety systems, things no one else understood. He uncovered a fraud corners cut, lives at risk. He refused to stay quiet. Harper felt her pulse in her ears. And the ring? Payment? Laura whispered. It was given as a promise. An agreement that the truth would be honored. But promises mean little to men who worship power. They betrayed him. Tried to bury the evidence. The ring became the only proof left that his story was real. He passed it to me, told me to keep it safe. One day, he said, this may be the only line that doesn't match. Harper closed her eyes. The words echoed Jonathan's accusation in the boardroom, liar, thief. And yet here was another version, another story of betrayal, not theft. She opened her eyes again, her throat aching. Why didn't you ever tell me this? Laura's hand trembled as she touched Harper's cheek. Because I wanted you to live free of their shadows. Because once you know the truth, it never lets you go. I didn't want that weight for you. Harper pressed her lips together, fighting the sting in her eyes. Too late, she thought. The weight is already mine. Laura leaned back, weary. Promise me something, Harper. Promise me you won't let them twist the story. Promise me you'll hold on to what's right, even when it hurts. Harper nodded, her voice breaking. I promise. She kissed her mother's forehead, then slipped the ring off, setting it gently back in the velvet box. But as she lay awake in her own bed later, staring at the cracked ceiling, she knew she couldn't keep that promise in silence. Jonathan Cain had challenged her to prove it. And now, with her mother's frail faith burning in her chest, Harper knew she had no choice. She would prove it, even if it meant burning down the illusions of one of America's most powerful families. Her eyes closed only as dawn pressed pale light through the blinds. The city outside stirred with its endless appetite, and Harper whispered to the ceiling as if to her grandfather himself. Justice isn't loud. It's patient. It's hidden. But it waits for someone to speak it out loud. And now, whether she was ready or not, she would. Morning broke sharp and unkind. The kind of New York morning that made every surface glitter like opportunity, but cut just as easily. Harper woke with the weight of her mother's words still pressing down on her chest. She brewed weak coffee in the dented percolator, listening to the gurgle and hiss as though it were trying to remind her to breathe. Laura was still sleeping, pale against the pillow, the velvet box tucked safely into the drawer of the nightstand. Harper slipped the ring back onto her own hand, not out of defiance but out of necessity, as though it had become armor she couldn't leave behind. By the time she reached Manhattan, the streets buzzed with the tempo of ambition. Men in suits marched with phones glued to their ears, women in heels clipped past as if they could outrun time itself. Harper felt the thrift store blazer hanging heavier than ever on her shoulders. The tower of Cain Holdings rose above her like a wall of glass and steel daring her to step inside again. She hesitated in the lobby, marble cold under her shoes, until the receptionist looked up with the bored sharpness of someone paid to notice intrusions. Harper Evans? The woman asked flatly, as if the name were already a problem. Harper nodded, clutching the strap of her bag. Mr. Cain wants to see you. 18th floor. You'll need this. She slid across a temporary badge. The words startled Harper. He wanted to see her? Not security? Not the police? She rode the elevator up, each ding another heartbeat pounding against her ribs. When the doors opened, Jonathan Cain was waiting. Hands clasped behind his back, eyes fixed on the city sprawled beyond the window. He didn't turn immediately, and Harper wondered if he had forgotten she was there. Then his voice cut through the silence. You made quite an impression last night. I didn't mean to, Harper said carefully. I just told the truth. He pivoted then, gaze landing on the ring. That truth has consequences. Do you understand that? She wanted to say no, that she was just a diner waitress with overdue bills. But instead, she heard herself answer, I'm starting to. A flicker of something passed over his expression, almost approval, almost warning. I need someone to assist with Whitestone's negotiations this week. The board is circling like vultures. And frankly, your interruption has already planted doubts. You want to defend your story? Here's your chance. Work for me. 1 week. After that, we'll see where the pieces fall. Harper blinked. You want me to work for you? In this building? Jonathan's lips pressed into something that was not quite a smile. Think of it as penance. Or as an opportunity. It depends on how you use it. Harper's first instinct was to refuse, to run back to the safety of Greece, stained aprons and predictable exhaustion. But then she thought of Laura whispering about promises and betrayal, of the board members' smirks, of Avery Holt's cologne masking the sour truth beneath it. If she wanted justice, if she wanted to protect her mother's honor, she couldn't walk away. She nodded once. 1 week. Jonathan gestured to the glass doors leading into the executive offices. Then let's begin. Inside, the atmosphere was a different universe. Sleek desks gleamed. Assistants moved with the precision of chess pieces. And every phone conversation seemed to pulse with money. Harper drew curious stares as Jonathan led her to a temporary desk, whispers trailing in her wake. She caught fragments. Is that the girl from the diner? How did she get in here? Cain's new pet project. Her cheeks burned but she straightened her shoulders. If they wanted to look down on her, let them. She had spent years balancing trays through jeers and impatience. Their contempt was just another kind of noise. By midday, she found herself sorting through files, cross-checking vendor invoices, her sharp eyes picking up mismatches that others had missed. Numbers calmed her, gave her something solid to hold. Yet, every time she caught a discrepancy, her mind flicked back to the boardroom, to the receipt she had laid down, to the way the K9 had barked at Holt. The dog had smelled something: ink, solvent, guilt. Late afternoon brought the first collision. Avery Holt appeared, tall, immaculate, his smile thin as a blade. He leaned against her desk, cologne stinging her nose. "So this is the famous waitress," he drawled. "I suppose Mr. Kane thinks you're going to save the company with your charm and your uncanny eye for receipts?" Harper met his gaze without flinching. "I'm just here to work." "Work," he repeated, rolling the word as though it were a joke. He tapped the edge of her desk. "Be careful, Miss Evans. This is a world built on contracts and clauses, not coffee stains and sentimental jewelry. People who don't understand that tend to get crushed." He straightened and walked away, leaving behind the stench of warning. Harper's stomach nodded, but she wrote his words down in the margin of her notepad, alongside the numbers she had been reconciling. She had learned long ago that every threat was also a clue. That evening, Jonathan summoned her into his office. The city spread out below like a river of light. He didn't look up from the papers in his hand. "How did Holt speak to you?" "Like I didn't belong here," Harper admitted. "He's not wrong," Jonathan replied, then set the papers down and finally looked at her. "But sometimes outsiders see what insiders refuse to. Don't waste that." He paused, eyes narrowing slightly. "Tell me again your mother, where did she get the ring?" Harper hesitated. Her pulse thudded in her ears. "From my grandfather. He said it was proof of a promise broken." Jonathan's jaw tightened, and for a moment she thought she saw the mask slip. The billionaire replaced by a man wrestling with something unspoken. He leaned back in his chair. "Then maybe we are both heirs to broken promises." Harper left the office with her heart pounding. She didn't know if she had made an ally or stepped deeper into the lion's den. But as she rode the subway back to Brooklyn, the ring cool against her finger, she whispered to herself, "1 week, I can survive 1 week." And yet deep down she knew survival wasn't enough. She wasn't here just to endure. She was here to uncover, to prove, to honor the promise her grandfather had left behind. The city roared outside the window, indifferent, relentless. Harper closed her eyes and saw again the boardroom, the glares. The smirk on Holt's face, the way the dog had barked at the scent of truth. She opened her eyes, with resolve hardening in her chest. 1 week would be enough. 1 week to prove her mother wasn't a liar. 1 week to drag the truth into the light, no matter how many walls of glass she had to break. The week moved like a storm front, heavy with the pressure of something about to break. Harper arrived early each morning, weaving through the suited crowd that never once thought to look at her as anything more than a curiosity. Yet she felt their eyes when she passed, whispers curling like smoke in the corners of the hallways. Jonathan had kept his word. She was included in meetings, her notes quietly requested, her observations tolerated. But every step she took seemed to grind against Avery Holt's patience. His smirks had grown sharper, his greetings colder. Still, she kept her head down, writing every irregularity she noticed in her small leather notebook. She saw invoices duplicated under different shells, contracts signed with initials that didn't match, vendor addresses that disappeared under the simplest search. They all led back to the same circle of names orbiting Avery's desk. Each night she returned to Brooklyn exhausted, her mother watching her with a mixture of pride and worry. The velvet box stayed in the drawer, but Harper wore the ring every day. A silent rebellion and a reminder of the promise she had sworn. On Thursday, the fracture widened. The Whitestone negotiations reached their peak, a signing ceremony scheduled at the Plaza Hotel, all chandeliers and crystal. The kind of stage designed to intimidate. Harper had been told her role was only to observe, but when she arrived, Jonathan directed her to sit beside him at the long table, a seat where no one could ignore her presence. The board members bristled, Avery most of all. His glare cut into her as though he could will her out of existence. The meeting began. Polished words traded like weapons. Signatures poised to fall onto contracts worth hundreds of millions. Harper forced herself to listen, to follow the cadence of business language she was still learning. She caught small hesitations. A number that didn't align with what she had seen in the files. When the moment came for Jonathan to sign, she leaned slightly toward him and whispered, "Check Appendix C." His pen froze midair. The room noticed. Avery leaned forward, voice deceptively smooth. "Mr. Kane, is there a problem?" Jonathan's eyes flicked to Harper, then back to the document. His jaw tightened. "Appendix C," he said, sliding the paper toward the lawyers. "The vendor analysis doesn't reconcile." The lawyers exchanged confused glances. One flipped pages, his brows furrowing deeper with each line. At last he looked up. "He's right. These numbers contradict the disclosures filed last quarter." A ripple moved through the table. The Whitestone representative frowned. "Are you telling me this contract is invalid?" Avery's voice cut sharp. "Clerical error. Nothing more." Harper felt her pulse race. She knew what she had seen. It's not a clerical error, she said, her voice breaking the hush. All heads turned toward her. She swallowed hard, forcing her voice steady. It's deliberate duplication. Payments routed through Morrison Consulting and then back into holding accounts. The trail is right there. Avery's face went pale, then red. This is outrageous, he snapped. You're letting a waitress derail a deal of this magnitude? But the damage was done. The room was alive with doubt, lawyers scribbling, board members muttering. Jonathan set his pen down. We will not sign today, he announced. Not until compliance verifies every line. The Whitestone representative pushed his chair back, angry but cautious. Then our trust is shaken. Consider our position under review. He stood, his entourage following like shadows. The grand ballroom emptied with the efficiency of rats fleeing a sinking ship, leaving only Jonathan, Harper, and the board members bristling with anger. The explosion came swiftly. Patricia, one of the oldest members, slammed her folder shut. You've humiliated us, Jonathan. Letting a girl with no qualifications meddle in contracts. She saw what the rest of you ignored. Jonathan interrupted. Or chose to ignore. His gaze swept the table, finally landing on Avery. The CFO's expression was carefully neutral again, but Harper noticed the twitch of a vein at his temple. This board is finished entertaining fairy tales, Patricia hissed. If this company collapses, it will be on your head, and hers. Jonathan dismissed the meeting. His tone final. Harper gathered her notes. Her hands trembling. When the room cleared, she turned to him. You believe me now? He studied her for a long moment. Belief isn't the issue, he said quietly. Proof Island. His eyes dropped to the ring. That ring is leverage, Harper. To some, it's proof. To others, it's a threat. And threats have a way of drawing blood. That night, Harper left the plaza by the side entrance, the chill wind cutting through her blazer. She pulled it tighter around her, mind racing. She had barely stepped onto the sidewalk when footsteps echoed behind her. A voice low, sharp called her name. Avery. He caught up, his smile thin as wire. You're playing with fire, he said. Do you think Cain will protect you when it burns down around you? You're nothing but a pawn he's using against me. Harper lifted her chin. I'm not afraid of you. You should be, he murmured, stepping closer. Because pawns are always the first to fall. Before she could reply, a sharp bark cut the night. The same German shepherd from the towers stepped into view, its handler approaching from the curb. Avery flinched, just barely, before smoothing his expression. He tipped an imaginary hat and walked away, his cologne trailing behind like smoke. Harper's breath came shaky, but she knelt briefly, letting the dog sniff her hand. Its calm eyes met hers, a silent reassurance. She whispered, "Good boy." Then straightened, resolve hardening in her chest. By the time she returned home, her mother was awake. The velvet box open on the bedspread. Laura looked at her with weary eyes that still burned with strength. They'll come after you now, she said softly. Harper sat beside her, taking her hand. Then let them. I'm not backing down. She squeezed her mother's fingers gently, her voice a whisper that felt like a vow. I'll prove it. For you. For him. For the promise. As the city roared beyond their window, Harper felt the fracture line widen between truth and power, between past and present. And somewhere deep inside, she knew the next move would determine not just her mother's honor, but her own survival. The morning after the plaza unraveling felt like waking into a city that no longer trusted her. Harper could feel it in the way people on the subway eyed her badge clipped to her blazer, in the receptionist's arched brow when she walked back into Kane Holdings, in the silence that greeted her on the 18th floor. The rumor had spread she was the waitress who had stalled a multi-million-dollar deal. Some thought she was reckless, others whispered she was brave, but all agreed she didn't belong. Jonathan's office door was half open. He stood inside with his back to her, shoulders rigid as he stared out at the skyline. You've made me enemies, he said when she entered. His voice was low, tight, like a rope pulled too far. Harper set her notebook on his desk. I didn't make them, Jonathan. They were already there. All I did was pull the curtain back. He finally turned, eyes falling to the ring on her hand. You keep saying that ring is proof. Then show me. Find me something that can't be dismissed as clerical error or sentimental nonsense. It was both a command and a dare, and Harper felt its weight settle in her chest. She spent the next hours in the archives, a dim floor that smelled of dust and toner, pulling file after file until her fingers ached. She found ledgers written by hand decades ago. Notes in margins. Receipts yellowed with age. Most of it was noise, but now and then she caught threads. Owen Evans, her grandfather, listed as an engineer on early Kane projects. Annotations about safety tests, then, abruptly, his name disappearing from the records. When she traced the dates, she saw the gap matched the year her mother had whispered about the year promises had been broken. Late that night, she stumbled home with copies stuffed into her bag. Laura was awake, fragile in the glow of the bedside lamp. Harper laid the papers out across the blanket, her voice trembling with urgency. "Mom, look. He was there. He signed these reports. He warned them about cracks in the foundation. And then his signature is gone from everything after. They erased him." Laura's eyes filled with tears. She touched the faded ink as though it were her father's hand. "He told me they'd bury him," she whispered. "But he said the ring would outlast their lies." Harper took her hand. "Then we use it. We take this and the ring. And we show the board what they did." The next day, Jonathan convened a closed session. The board gathered like vultures on the top floor. Harper stood beside him, the ring glinting under the lights, her bag heavy with copies. Patricia sneered openly. "We're really allowing this circus again." Avery sat composed, but Harper noticed the tightness around his jaw. Jonathan raised a hand. "Before you decide whether to remove me, hear this." He nodded to Harper. Her palms were slick with sweat, but she stepped forward. "My grandfather worked for this company. He uncovered fraud safety systems ignored, lives put at risk. He filed reports. You erased them. But he left this ring as proof." She lifted her hand, the sapphire catching every eye. "And this," she said, pulling the copies from her bag, "is his handwriting. These are his warnings." The signature stopped the moment his voice became inconvenient. "That's not a clerical error. That's erasure." The room stirred. Patricia scoffed, but the lawyers leaned forward. Avery broke his silence, his voice icy. "This is desperation. Faded ink and a trinket do not undo a century of progress. You're letting grief cloud your judgment, Miss Evans. And you, Jonathan, you're letting this girl drag your name through mud." Jonathan's eyes narrowed. "Then explain this," he said, sliding the copies across the table. "Explain why a registered vendor, Morrison Consulting, is traced back to your brother-in-law's address. Explain why the dog in security barked only at you the night of the leak." Gasps circled the table. Avery's composure cracked. Sweat beating at his temple. He rose suddenly, voice rising. "This is a setup, M." Before anyone could respond, the door burst open. Security entered, the handler with the German shepherd at his side. The dog lunged toward Avery, barking with a ferocity that silenced the room. The handler snapped the leash, his voice firm. "The scent matches the solvent from the tampered accounting packets." "It's him." Avery stumbled back, face pale. "You can't prove intent," he spat. But in his haste, his briefcase slipped. Papers spilled across the floor, statements, transfers. A USB drive that slid to Harper's feet. She picked it up slowly, heart pounding. Jonathan nodded for her to plug it into the projector. The screen lit with rows of transactions, dates, and signatures all pointing to Avery's embezzlement. Silence fell. Then Patricia whispered, horrified, "Good God." Avery made a desperate move for the door, but security blocked him. The board members erupted, voices overlapping anger, betrayal, demands for explanations. Jonathan's voice cut through it all. "Remove him." Security escorted Avery out, the dog growling low until the doors shut behind them. The room exhaled like it hadn't breathed in years. Jonathan turned to Harper, his expression unreadable. "You just saved this company from collapse. And you exposed the rot we let fester." Harper's legs trembled, but she stood tall. "I didn't do it for the company," she said quietly. "I did it for my mother. For my grandfather. For the truth." For a moment, even Patricia had no words. Jonathan placed a steady hand on the table, his voice firm. "From this day forward, Owen Evans's name will be restored in the records. His warnings will not be forgotten again." Harper felt tears sting her eyes, but she blinked them back. The fight was not over, not yet, but the tide had turned. She had proven the promise was real, and for the first time, the weight of the ring felt less like a burden and more like a torch. That night, as she walked out of the tower into the cool air, the city lights seemed different, less indifferent, more alive. She whispered to herself, "Justice isn't loud." But tonight, it spoke. And though shadows still lingered, she knew she had found the proof her grandfather had entrusted her to carry. The battle was far from finished. But she was no longer afraid. The days that followed Avery Holt's removal were unlike anything Harper had ever known. The tower of glass and steel that had once felt like a fortress of contempt now pulsed with uneasy silence. Employees no longer whispered only about the waitress who didn't belong. Now they whispered about corruption, betrayal, and the courage of a young woman who had forced the truth into daylight. Harper felt their stares, not all of them kind. Some looked at her with respect, others with resentment. But she had learned long ago that eyes on you meant you were still standing. She continued to work beside Jonathan, sorting through contracts and cleaning up the debris Avery had left. The USB drive revealed more than theft, it contained years of small manipulations. Decisions that had slowly siphoned money while eroding trust. Restoring what was broken would take time, but Harper saw in Jonathan's face a determination that reminded her of her grandfather's stubbornness. One evening, after a long day spent with compliance officers, Jonathan poured 2 glasses of water and sat across from her in his office. "You realize you've changed the course of this company," he said quietly. Harper shook her head. "I didn't change it. I just showed what was already there." He studied her for a moment, his gaze softer than she'd ever seen it. "Do you know why that ring struck me the moment I saw it?" She looked down at her hand, the sapphire catching the lamplight. "Because it was yours once," she guessed. Jonathan leaned back, eyes distant. "My grandfather mentioned it only once. He said a man who worked for him had demanded a promise. A promise of integrity. But when the man spoke too loudly, the promise was buried. I never knew his name. Until now." Harper felt her throat tighten. "Owen Evans," she whispered. Jonathan nodded slowly. "And you've carried the cost of his silence for years." That night she returned home with a heaviness she couldn't shake. Laura was sitting up in bed, the velvet box open on her lap. She looked up at her daughter with pride and sorrow interwoven in her tired smile. "You did it, Harper," she said softly. "You brought his name back." Harper sat beside her, tears brimming. "It's not over, Mom. There's still so much to fix. But at least they know now. At least they can't erase him anymore." Laura reached for her hand. "Your grandfather used to say justice doesn't always come in thunder. Sometimes it comes in a whisper. You were his whisper." Harper laid her head against her mother's shoulder, the weight of exhaustion giving way to relief. For the first time in years, she felt lighter. But not everyone shared in the quiet triumph. Patricia and others on the board still simmered with anger, humiliated by their blindness. Though Avery had been led away in disgrace, the culture that allowed him to thrive still lingered. Harper sensed it in the sidelong glances, in the clipped tones during meetings. Jonathan noticed too. He began restructuring committees, cutting away the rot piece by piece, and he asked Harper's opinion more than once, to the shock of everyone else. Each time she spoke, she felt her grandfather's courage echo through her. She was no longer invisible. A week after Avery's downfall, Jonathan invited Harper and her mother to a small ceremony in the company's atrium. Employees filled the space, the marble floor reflecting the glow of the overhead lights. A new plaque was unveiled, engraved with Owen Evans's name and the words, "Engineer, Whistleblower, Guardian of Integrity." Harper's heart clenched as Laura wept silently, her thin hands trembling as she touched her father's restored place in history. Jonathan addressed the crowd, his voice steady but resonant. "We honor a man who spoke truth when it cost him everything. Let us not bury such voices again. Let us build a company where promises are kept, even when inconvenient." When it was Harper's turn to speak, she felt every eye on her. But this time she didn't falter. "My grandfather believed that a single honest line can hold up against a wall of lies," she said. "He gave me this ring as proof. But today, this plaque means more than any jewel. It means his story will outlive the people who tried to silence him." The applause that followed was not thunderous, but it was steady, the kind that came from respect earned, not demanded. That night, Harper and Laura sat together on their small balcony in Brooklyn, the city lights stretching endlessly before them. Laura's voice was faint but filled with contentment. "He would be proud of you." Harper looked down at the ring, then at her mother's weary smile. "I hope so," she said. "But more than that, I hope he knows he wasn't alone." They sat in silence for a long while, listening to the hum of traffic, the heartbeat of the city that had nearly swallowed them but had, in the end, given them space to breathe. In the weeks that followed, Harper returned to her shifts at the diner, not because she had to but because it grounded her. Customers still saw her as the girl with coffee pots and refills, but now she carried herself differently. She listened closely, noticed the mismatched lines in people's stories, the way her grandfather had taught her. Jonathan checked in from time to time, offering her a permanent position. She hadn't answered yet. Part of her longed to fight from the inside, to keep pulling back curtains. But another part knew her strength lay in being the outsider who noticed what insiders ignored. One late evening, as she wiped down the counter, Chloe nudged her with a grin. "So what's next for you, hero? Politics? Corporate watchdog? Or just queen of pancakes?" Harper laughed softly. "I don't know yet. But whatever it is, it'll be honest." She glanced out the window, where the city lights glimmered like stars trapped on Earth. For the first time, they didn't look cold. They looked like possibilities. As she walked home that night, the ring cool against her finger, Harper whispered into the dark, not to the city but to the memory of her grandfather. "Justice isn't loud. But I'll keep speaking, as long as it takes." And somewhere, in the quiet after the storm, she felt the promise settle into her bones, not a burden anymore, but a legacy she was ready to carry forward.